Good evening, everyone. This is Wayne over at the Alchemical Tech Revolution YouTube channel. Tonight, we're going to go through part 3 of Melchizedek and the Mystery of Fire. This 1926 book from Mr. Manly P. Hall explores the idea of the priestcraft of the Order of Melchizedek, which he claims is the highest order within the brotherhoods of mankind, of these secret societies. These are the ones that are the true hierophants of all the secret societies, in his view, the Order of Melchizedek. And we're going to explore a little further here in section 3 of this book, Melchizedek and the Mystery of Fire. And we'll start in, and we're going to go over a lot of really interesting things here, because a lot of these occult teachings are about the human body and the spiritual nature of the different aspects and parts of the human body. And we'll see as we go along. Mr. Hall is pointing out a lot of really interesting ideas here, and the knowledge of the anatomy of many of these ancient occult orders is really staggering, honestly. Especially, they know things about the human body that our modern science doesn't accept, that reaches into other more spiritual type realms. These kind of ideas. So we're going to explore that tonight, and we'll go through part 3, and we'll start reading right now. Part 3, the sacred fire in the spine and brain. Santee called the medulla spinalis, spinal cord in parentheses it says, the central axis of the nervous system. In a person of average size, the spinal cord is about 18 inches in length, weighs approximately 1 ounce, and terminates opposite the first lumbar vertebra. The upper end of the spinal cord, passing upward through the foramen magnum, which it says in parentheses here is the large opening in the occipital bone of the skull, ends at the medulla oblongata. And just as a casual aside here, the medulla oblongata is what makes alligators ornery. Not the fact that they have so many teeth and no toothbrush like Mama says. But that's neither here nor there. Let's get back to the reading. Running through the spinal cord is a tiny central channel referred to as the sixth ventricle. This is described as follows. It is just visible to the naked eye, but it extends throughout the cord and expands above the fourth ventricle. In the conus medullaris, it is also dilated, forming the ventriculus terminalis. And it says Krausi in parentheses here. I'm assuming that's who he's quoting from. That's capital Krausei. According to the Eastern system of occult culture, there are 49 sacred nerve centers in the human body, of which the 7 most important and key centers are placed near the spine at various intervals. The total number, 49, is the square of 7, and is also the number of rounds and sub-rounds of a planetary chain. When seen clairvoyantly, all of these centers resemble flowers or electric sparks. Each one of the 7 main plexuses has 6 of lesser importance surrounding it, thus forming 6 pointed stars diagrammatically, although the centers are not arranged in star-like order in the body. Concerning the continued recurrence of the sacred number 7 in connection with the organs and parts of the human body, H.P. Blavatsky writes, remember that physiology, imperfect as it is, shows septenary groups all over the exterior and interior of the body. The 7 orifices, the 7 organs at the base of the brain, the 7 plexuses, the pharyngeal, the laryngeal, cavernous, cardiac, epigastric, some as solar plexus, prostatic, and sacral plexus, etc. These 7 are the negative spinal plexuses of first importance, but disciples of the mysteries are warned not to attempt the development of these centers because they are negative poles. All of the real plexuses which the true disciple of the highest knowledge should try to unfold are located within the skull, for the body is a negative pole of that spiritual body contained within the cranial cavity. As the body is controlled by the brain, the true adept works with the brain, avoiding the negative poles of the brain centers which are located along the spine. Proper development of the 7 brain discs, or spiritual interpenetrating globes, results in the awakening of the spinal flowers by an indirect process. Beware of the direct process by concentrating upon or directionalizing the internal breath towards the spinal centers. Madame Blavatsky might have added to her list of septenaries the 7 sacred organs about the heart, the 7 ductless glands of first importance, the 7 methods by which the body is vitalized, the 7 sacred breaths, the 7 body systems, bones, nerves, arteries, muscles, etc., the 7 layers of the auric egg, the 7 major divisions of the embryo, the 7 senses, 5 awakened and 2 latent, it says in parentheses, and the 7-year periods into which human life is divided. All of these are reminders of the fact that 7 primitive and primary spirits have become incarnated in the composite structure of man, and that the Elohim are actually within his own nature, where from their 7 thrones they are molding him into a septenary creature. One of these Elohim, which corresponds to a color, a musical note, a planetary vibration, and a mystical dimension, is the key consciousness of every kingdom in nature. The Elohim also take turns in controlling the life of the human being. And I'm going to pause here, folks. All this information that's being presented now, okay, Mr. Hall is alluding to more of a spiritual type body that actually coexists within our material physical bodies. This is what he's talking about. These are the occult ideas that he's referring to here. And I would also add that whether you believe any of this stuff or not is irrelevant, because there are people in positions of power in this world that absolutely believe that these things are actual truths. And they act accordingly. And the things that they do to act on these beliefs will affect us all. So we need to keep that in mind. So see, the thing people need to understand about this is whether it sounds nonsensical to you or not, there are people that believe this stuff and have studied this stuff in depth and know certain things associated with these teachings and how to use them to manipulate people in different ways. And that is exactly what they do. So if you think it's all a load of hooey or not, it's irrelevant, because there are people in this world in positions of power that absolutely believe this stuff and act upon those beliefs. So that's why I think it's important to get this stuff out in the open so we know who these people are that we're dealing with. And I do find a lot of interesting truths to be encapsulated in many of these teachings. The thing is, though, a lot of them have been twisted and perverted in a negative fashion and used as a weapon against the masses of humanity. And they've done this primarily through the means of secrecy, by keeping this information secret from the public, withholding information. See, if you know something that somebody else doesn't know, you could use that information as a weapon against them in a sort of way. And that's why I would say secrecy is repugnant. John Kennedy said that. He said secrecy is repugnant. And I would agree with that assessment, because I don't see how any good could come from secrecy. And, when it comes to long-term things, especially secrecy over important things, like the physical nature of where it is we live, who we are, important things about our physical being, things like that. So, anyway, not to go on a lecture too long about that, let's get back to the reading here. Okay. According to the ancient Brahmins, the lord of the human race is keyed to the musical note Fa, and his vibration runs through the minute tube in the spinal column. This tube is called the Sushumna. The essence moving through the Sushumna finally blossoms outward, forming a magnificent flower in the brain. This is called Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus, in the midst of which is enthroned the divine eye of the gods. In India, it is possible to secure inexpensive chromos showing a meditating yogi with these flower centers along the spine, connected together by the 3 nagas, or serpent gods, which represent the divisions of the spinal cord. The caduceus of Hermes shows the 2 serpents wound around the central staff, where they vibrate as the sharp and flat notes of the central stem. The Naga gods, or serpents, often symbolized with human heads, sometimes as cobras with 7 heads, are favorite motifs in Oriental art. In an isolated part of the jungle in Indochina stand the remains of the ancient city of Angkor, which is also known as Angkor Wat these days, concerning the building of which nothing is known, although the natives maintain that its great structures were raised in a single night by the gods. These buildings contain hundreds of carvings of great serpents, most of them hooded cobras. In some cases, the bodies, being of great length, are used as railings around walls and the sides of steps. In the Indian chromos, the blossoms along the spine are often shown with varying numbers of petals. For example, the one at the base of the spine has but 4 petals, the next above 6. Each of these petals is inscribed with a mysterious Sanskrit character representing a letter of the ancient alphabet. The petals are believed to indicate the number of nerves branching from the plexus or ganglion. The lotus blossoms are often ornamented with the figures of the gods, for all of the deities of the Brahmin pantheon are related to nerve centers in the human body, and the proclivities which they demonstrate mythologically are symbolically of activities within the nature of man. Going to pause there, folks. What do we always tell you about many of these ancient cultures and these mythologies? The idea of these gods. These people didn't necessarily worship these gods per se. These are aspects of nature, and these are aspects of the human body being represented in myth. See, it's allegorical. What they're talking about is allegory of sorts. So they're telling you important things. These things are always encoded in the different mythologies and stuff like that. And that's exactly what this is talking about here. These are aspects of the natural world, aspects of nature, aspects of man himself, man's physiology even, represented through these mythical archetypes. And that's exactly what's being demonstrated right here. Anyway, back to the reading. One Oriental painting shows 3 sunbursts, one covering the head, in the midst of which sits Brahma with 4 heads, his body a dark, mysterious color. The second sunburst, which covers the heart, solar plexus, and upper abdominal region, shows Vishnu sitting in the blossom of the lotus on a couch, formed of the coils of the serpent of cosmic motion, its 7 hooded head forming a canopy over the god. Over the generative system is a third sunburst, in the midst of which sits Shiva, his body a grayish white, and the Ganges River flowing out of the crown of his head. This painting was the work of an Indian mystic who spent many years on the figures, subtly concealing therein great truths. The Christian legends could be related to the human body by the same method as the Oriental, for the meanings concealed in the teachings of both schools are identical. In Masonry, the 3 sunbursts represent the gates of the temple, at which Hiram is struck, there being no gate in the north, because the sun never shines from the northern angle of the heavens. The north is the symbol of the physical because of its relation to ice, crystallized water, and to the body, crystallized spirit. Gonna pause there, folks. Ever wonder about that text in the Bible that talks about how Lucifer will sit in the sides of the north? That's what this is referring to in the physical world, see? He wants to sit in the sides of the north. So he wants to rule over this physical world. That's what that speaks of. And you'll notice the concept of crystallized water and the body being crystallized spirit. See, that's why crystals are important in occult teachings as well, because this is how they view what happens in these different spiritual realms or spiritual worlds. Is things start in, say, like the archetypal world or world of thought, and they eventually step down gradually through these different steps into the raw physical world, and they crystallize into physical forms and physical manifestation here. That's the kind of ideas they believe, so that's what they're talking about here. But anyway, let's get back to the reading. In man, the light shines towards the north, but never from it, because the body has no light of its own. It shines with the reflected glory of the divine life particles concealed within the physical substances. For this reason, the moon is accepted as the symbol of man's physical nature. Hiram, or Chiram, as he should more properly be called, inasmuch as his name consists of the letters which in Hebrew stand for fire, air, and water, represents the mysterious fiery, airy water which must be raised through the three grand centers symbolized by the ladder with three rungs and the sunburst flowers mentioned in the description of the Indian painting. It must also pass upward by means of the ladder of 7 rungs, the 7 lotus blossoms first described. These blossoms need not be considered entirely from an Oriental angle. Christians could properly call them the Stations of the Cross, for they are sacred places where the redeeming fire stops for a moment on its way up Calvary to liberation. Gonna pause there, folks. Now, do you hear how he's relating this in an allegorical sense to an actual physical process within the human body? And we'll get to that. We'll see. This next part is going to break it down a little further for you. That's what they're talking about. Calvary represents the skull, or the brain. So that's where liberation is. This is talking about transmuting your spiritual nature alchemically from that of the lower animal to the higher spiritual man. And, this is kind of how they describe illumination and this kind of thing. Anyway, back to the reading. The spinal column is a chain of 33 segments divided into 5 groups. 1. The cervical or neck vertebrae, 7 in number. 2. The dorsal or thoracic vertebrae, of which there are 12, 1 for each rib. 3. The lumbar vertebrae, 5 in number. 4. The sacrum, 5 segments fused into 1 bone. And 5. The coccyx, 4 segments considered as 1. The 9 segments of the sacrum and coccyx are pierced by 10 foramina, through which pass the roots of the tree of life. 9 is the sacred number of man, and there is a great mystery concealed in the sacrum and coccyx. That part of the body, from the kidneys downward, was called by the early Kabbalists the land of Egypt, into which the children of Israel were taken during captivity. Out of Egypt, Moses, and it says in parentheses here, the illuminated mind, as his name signifies, led the tribes of Israel, the 12 faculties, by raising the brazen serpent in the wilderness upon the symbol of the Tau cross. At the base of the spine, there is a tiny nerve center, concerning which nothing is known, but the occultist realizes that the symbolism of the second crucifixion, which is supposed to have taken place in Egypt, has reference to the crossing of certain nerves at the base of the spine. A friend visiting Mexico was good enough to count the rattles on the tails of stone images of Quetzalcoatl, or Kulkulkan, as he is sometimes known. In nearly every case, they were 9 in number. The cosmic hierarchy controlling the constellation of Scorpio has control of the occult fires in the human body. To symbolize this, they were given the name of the serpent gods, and the priests initiated into their mystery wore the coiled serpent in the form of the uraeus upon their foreheads. These priests also often carried flexible staffs, carved in the form of a snake and from 6 to 10 feet long. The wood of which they were made was specially treated by a process now lost. At a certain part of the ceremonial, the priests bent the flexible staffs into circles, placing the tail of the carved snake into its mouth, accompanying the process with secret invocations. The transcendentalists of the Middle Ages did the same thing, but not with the full understanding possessed by the ancient priests. The lords of Scorpio, being the great initiators, accepted none into the mysteries, save when the sun was in a certain degree of Taurus, symbolized by Apis, the bull. When the bull carried the sun between his horns, the neophytes were admitted. In geocentric astrology, this takes place when the sun is supposedly in the last decan of the constellation of Scorpio. This is true not only in the ancient Egyptian rituals, but it is still true in the mystery schools. Candidates for the occult path of fire are to this day admitted only when the sun is geocentrically in Scorpio and heliocentrically in Taurus. The star group constituting the constellation of the Scorpion closely resembles a spread eagle and is one of the reasons why that bird is sacred to Freemasonry, which is a fire cult. Gonna pause right there, folks. Did you hear a couple of things that Manly P. Hall just said in there? First of all, he pointed out the concept that they use geocentric astrology as well as heliocentric astrology for determinations of ritual practices. So that tells us right there that they're well aware of at least two different processes of reading the sky clock. Okay? So using these ideas together in tandem tells us that there are people in positions of power in this world that have learned how to read and encode these different ritualistic patterns and stuff in the sky in different ways. So they use these things in their planning. And sometimes it's hard for us to pick out which planning phase they're using. So this is what they're talking about. And they're saying here that it's only at certain times of the year when the sun's in certain positions that they admit new initiates into this fire cult. And he admits right here, Freemasonry is a fire cult. He says it very plainly. And I'll read that last sentence again. The star group constituting the constellation of the Scorpion closely resembles a spread eagle and is one of the reasons why that bird is sacred to Freemasonry, which is a fire cult, period. So that also tells you why they use the eagle as a symbol. It represents Scorpio, okay? And Scorpio, being the great initiator, talking about secret processes of initiation, and he talks a little earlier about how the priests used to carry these special staffs that they were able to actually bend into the circle of the serpent eating his tail, which is also a symbol known as the Ouroboros and is also considered to be the true seal of Solomon, not the six-pointed star as many are accustomed to thinking. That's not the real seal of Solomon. The Ouroboros is the real seal of Solomon. But that's what that represents as well. But anyway, not to babble on too long about that. There's still a lot of important things to cover in the rest of this. So let's continue on. Although the three tubes of the spinal cord are called in the ancient wisdom the Nagas, or whirling snakes, and the serpent which cannot die till sundown was accepted as their symbol, the scorpion has also been used as emblematic of the spinal fire. This scorpion was called Judas the Betrayer, for he is a backbiter, carrying his sting in the sacrum and coccyx. We are reminded of the legend of Parsifal, for the castle of Klingsor, the evil magician, located at the foot of the mountain in the midst of the Garden of Illusion, is merely a symbol of this city of Babylon and the land of darkness, where all too often the Son of God is tempted to sacrifice his immortality. Here also is the scene which Goethe called Walpurgis Night. It is here also that the false light is chained for 1,000 years, as related by Milton in Paradise Lost. Concerning the descent of the spirit of fire down the spine into the place of darkness, Milton says, "Him the almighty power hurled headlong flaming from the ethereal sky, with hideous ruin and combustion, down to bottomless perdition, there to dwell in adamantine chains and penal fire." It is also from here that the hordes of scorpions arose, spreading blight and destruction to all the earth, as it is related in the book of Revelation. Here also is the rock Moriah, over the brow of which Hiram is buried. Here lurks Typhon, the destroyer, and Satan, who was stoned. This is the dwelling place of the false light, to differentiate it from the true light, which shines out through the regions of Shamayim above. Between these two lies the length of the spinal cord, a rope connecting the ark and the anchor. Gonna pause right there, folks. Do you see what Mr. Manly P. Hall is telling you here? He's telling you that basically this is an alchemical process of the enlightenment of man, that this spinal cord fire, this fire exists in your spinal cord, this alchemical fire, and the initiation process is supposed to draw this higher into the brain. It pulls your creative force out of the animal creative force which is located in the sacrum and coccyx area, indicating your animal nature and enlightening you, bringing you up to a spiritual form of enlightenment and intelligence, denoted by the base of the brain here. And this is what it's talking about. And he's also saying here, between these two lies the length of the spinal cord, a rope connecting the arc and the anchor. Your sacrum and coccyx area being your anchor, and the arc being that escape from this material plane, that being the brain or the intellect. You see, they believe that by overcoming your animal nature, you can achieve godhood through the use of your intellect. And that's kind of what it's talking about here. All right. But let's just get back to the reading here. I'm just going to emphasize something else, too. Earlier, he talked about that sacrum and coccyx area being referred to as the quote-unquote the land of Egypt. And the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt to the promised land, this is an allegory for the same thing. You see, it relates back to the human body. The divine fire, this spiritual fire within your spinal cord, the spinal fire he's talking about, it's drawing this up from the lower animal area to the higher mind. See, that's what he's talking about here. Anyway, let's get back to the reading, though. There is a legend among the Orientals to the effect that Kundalini, the goddess of the serpentine spinal fire, growing tired of heaven, decided to visit the new earth, which was being formed in the sea of space. She therefore climbed down a rope ladder, the umbilical cord, it says in parentheses, from heaven, and found an island, in parentheses it says the fetus, in the Sea of Meru, and it says here in parentheses the amniotic fluids, surrounded by the mountains of eternity, and it says in parentheses the Chorion, all of which existed within the egg of Brahma, and it says in parentheses the womb of Matrapadma. After exploring the island, Kundalini decided to return up the ladder once more, but as she was about to ascend, the ladder was cut from above, and it says in parentheses, the umbilical cord severed at birth, and the island drifted off into space. In fear, Kundalini ran and hid herself in a cave, and it says in parentheses, the sacral plexus, where, according to certain of the Eastern teachings, she remains coiled like a cobra in the snake charmer's basket, from which she can be lured only by the 3 mysterious notes of the charmer's flute. When Kundalini begins to unwind, she ascends as a serpentine stream of fire through the spinal canal and into the brain, where she stimulates the activity of the pituitary body. Gonna pause right there, folks. Do you see this allegory that Hall is pointing out here? This allegory for birth, for descending from heaven into physical materiality and being born into the world. From heaven, this island, that would be the fetus, in the Sea of Meru, the amniotic fluids, etc., etc. This illustrates to me the importance of the works of one Mr. Kurt Kallenbach, and if you're not familiar with him, go check him out. He talks about these different legal ideas and how they use this straw man identity concept to enslave us in certain ways, as far as tying us to a corporate paper entity for the most part. And it all has to do with the birth certificate. And this is exactly the types of stuff that he points out, using the Bible as his guide to do so. And I think a lot of his work is very important, especially if we want to know how to proceed legally going forward according to natural law. So anyway, that's just a little aside there for people. Going to get back to the reading here, though. The spine may be divided horizontally into 3 sections. The lowest section includes the lumbar vertebrae, together with the segments forming the sacrum and coccyx, and is surrounded by a brick-red haze of a lurid and angry color. The haze is oily in texture and causes the sacrum and coccyx to appear the color of dried blood. The color, however, is living rather than dead. Higher up towards the lumbar vertebrae, the color is somewhat lighter and not so angry-looking. It gradually turns to orange, and through the section composed of the 12 dorsal vertebrae, there is a golden glow radiating outward from a thread-like line of what appears to be a river of yellow fire. These colors extend somewhat outward along the nerves which branch off from the spine between the vertebrae. A little higher, the yellow becomes flecked with green, and through the cervical section, the stream becomes faintly electric blue. Through the ida and pingala, two lateral tubes through the spinal cord paralleling the central tube on either side, this stream of fire goes up and down incessantly. The farther up the fire goes, the thinner and less brilliant its hues, but the purer and more beautiful the colors, until finally they meet in a seething molten mass in the pons of the medulla oblongata, where the fire begins almost immediately to permeate the third ventricle and agitate the pituitary body. This tiny form is described by Santee as follows. The hypophysis, pituitary body, it says in parentheses, is composed of two lobes bound together by connective tissue. A sheet of dura mater, diaphragma solae, it says in parentheses, holds them in the hypophyseal fossa. The anterior lobe, the larger, is derived from the epithelium of the mouth cavity and in structure resembles the thyroid gland. Its closed vesicles, limed with columnar epithelium, in part ciliated, contain a viscid jelly-like material, pituita, I can't even pronounce this, pituita, it says in parentheses, which suggested the old name for the body. The anterior lobe is hollowed out on its posterior surface, and it says in parentheses, kidney shape, and receives the posterior lobe, the infundibulum, into the concavity. The hypophysis has an internal secretion which appears to stimulate the growth of connective tissues and to be essential to sexual development. The pituitary body is the negative pole, yet it plays many roles in the development of spiritual consciousness. In one sense of the word, it is the initiator, for it raises the candidate, and it says in parentheses, the pineal gland. Being of feminine polarity, the pituitary body lives up to its dignity by being the eternal temptress. In the Egyptian myths, Isis, who partakes of the nature of the pituitary body, conjures Ra, the supreme deity of the sun, and it says in parentheses, who is here symbolic of the pineal gland, to disclose his sacred name, which he finally does. The physiologic process by means of which this is accomplished is worthy of detailed consideration. Okay, going to pause again, folks. He's talking about allegorical ideas tied up in the Egyptian mythology now, speaking of this process of the enlightenment of the human being through the use of this spinal fire. He's equating this to a physiological, spiritual process within the body. Okay, he's saying that this happens in the physical body, and within our physical body, there's also an ethereal type body that's tied into this. And I don't know if he talks about it in this book, but this is what they believe. The body, there's 4 different bodies that actually permeate through different spiritual realms per se, that are all tied and anchored to this gross physical body. And that's kind of one of the things they're talking about. So these things, whether you take them as being like literal in the sense of physiology, and I could say, you know, the physiology is definitely there. Like these parts of the spine and stuff do exist, and there are certain processes that kind of sound the way he's describing them here. But is this what he's talking about, or is he speaking of these things in a more spiritualized sense or an allegorical sense? Hard to say for sure, but this is what he's talking about, and this is what they believe. But you see how he tied it back to the Egyptian mythology. See, they reveal a lot more information in mythologies than what people would equate it to. They just look at the surface narrative of the story, but there's so much hidden meaning underneath. And that's the esoteric portion of it. See, the exoteric story does not give it full justice. That's why when people look back at some of these myth stories, they look at it and think, oh, it just sounds stupid and doesn't make sense. Well, when you're relating it to something like this, well, there's a whole lot of, hidden meaning there that could be garnered from it, isn't there? But anyway, not to ramble on too long about that, but let's get back to the reading. The pituitary body begins to glow very faintly and Little rippling rings of light pour out from around the gland and gradually fade out a short distance from the pituitary body. As occult growth continues, according to the proper understanding of the law of occultism, the emanating rings around the gland grow stronger. They are not equally distributed around the pituitary body. The circles are elongated on the side facing the third ventricle and reach out in graceful parabolas towards the pineal gland. Gradually, as the stream becomes more powerful, they approach ever closer to the slumbering eye of Shiva, tinting the form of the pineal gland with golden orange light and gently coaxing it into animation. Under the benign warmth and radiance of the pituitary fire, the divine egg thrills and moves, and the magnificent mystery of occult unfoldment takes place. The pineal gland is thus described by Santee. Quote, pineal body, corpus pinealis, is a cone-shaped body, 6 millimeters, 0.25 inches high, and 4 millimeters, 0.17 inches in diameter, joined to the roof of the third ventricle by a flattened stalk, the habenula. It is also called the epiphysis. The pineal body is situated in the floor of the transverse fissure of the cerebrum, directly below the splenium of the corpus callosum, and rests between the superior colliculi of the quadrigeminal bodies on the posterior surface of the midbrain. It is closely invested by pia mater. The habenula splits into a dorsal and ventral lamina, which are separated by the pineal recess. The ventral lamina fuses with the posterior commissure, but the dorsal stretches forward over the commissure in continuity with the roof epithelium. The border of the dorsal lamina is thickened along the line of attachment to the thalamus and forms the stria medullaris thalami, the pineal stria. The thickening is due to the presence of bundles of fibers from the columna of the fornix and the intermediate stria of the olfactory tract. Gonna pause there, folks. Did you know that your pineal gland and the various structures there are attached back behind to the topmost parts of your nasal cavity, where they stick this COVID test swab? Just an interesting correlation there, I thought I should point out. Anyway, back to the reading. Where did we leave off now? Here we go. Between the medullary striae at the posterior end, there is a transverse band, the commissura habenularum, through which the fibers of the striae partially desiccate to the nucleus habenulate in the thalamus. The interior of the pineal body is made up of closed follicles surrounded by ingrowths of connective tissue. The follicles are filled with epithelial cells mixed with calcareous matter, the brain sand, acervulus cerebri. Calcareous deposits are found also on the pineal stalk and along the chorioid plexuses. The function of the pineal body is unknown. Descartes facetiously suggests that it is the abode of the spirit, and it says in parentheses, the sand of man. In reptiles, there are two pineal bodies, an anterior and a posterior, of which the posterior remains undeveloped, but the anterior forms a rudimentary cyclopean eye. In the Hatteria, a New Zealand lizard, it projects through the parietal foramen and presents an imperfect lens and retina and, in its long stalk, nerve fibers. The human pineal body is probably homologous with the posterior pineal body of reptiles. The pineal gland is a link between the consciousness of man and the invisible worlds of nature. Whenever the arc of the pituitary body contacts this gland, there are flashes of temporary clairvoyance, but the process of making these two work together consistently is one requiring not only years, but lives of consecration and special physiological and biological training. This third eye is the cyclopean eye of the ancients, for it was an organ of conscious vision long before the physical eyes were formed, although vision was a sense of cognition rather than sight in those ancient days. Gonna pause there, folks. You see how they relate it to the tale of the Cyclops. This is your cyclopean eye, okay? And the third eye. The pineal gland, the third eye. That's what they're talking about. It gives you cognition, sight beyond sight. That's what they claim here. And it says here that this was an organ of conscious vision long before the physical eyes were formed. They're once again hearkening back to the idea of a type of creature that exists before humanity, before we became modern man, a type of proto-humanity, that kind of thing. But anyway, let's get back to the reading here. As man's contact with the physical world grew more complete, he lost his inner understanding together with the conscious connection with the creative hierarchies. In order to regain this connection, it is necessary for him to rise above the limitations of the physical world. He must not, however, sever his connection with humanity by becoming a recluse or an impractical dreamer. The occultist must not walk out of anything. He must work out of everything. In the pineal gland there is a tiny grit, or sand, concerning which modern science knows practically nothing. Investigations have shown that this grit is absent in idiots and others lacking properly organized mentality. Occultists knew that this grit is the key to the spiritual consciousness of man. It serves as a connecting link between consciousness and form. And I'm going to pause right there, folks. When he's talking about idiots, he's talking about people with mental deficiency developments, things of that nature, cognitive impairments, and that kind of thing. That's what he's saying there. But he's talking about occultists know that this grit is a key of the spiritual consciousness of man. Remember when they were talking about sand just earlier? How about this is the sand of man, the consciousness of man? That's kind of what they're talking about here. Whether this is true or not, who could say? All of this could be allegory, or it could be hearsay, or it could be nonsense. But once again, I would urge you to remember that whether you think any of this stuff has merit or not, there are people in positions of power in this world that wholeheartedly believe this stuff and act upon it, and what they do will affect us. So we need to keep that in mind. So this is why it's important for us to know exactly what it is that these people believe and the things that they act upon. And this is what we're getting in this book here. It's very jam-packed full of important occult information. So we're going to continue on. The foregoing will give brief understanding of part of the mystery of man's occult anatomy. Those with discerning eyes will see in the spinal canal leading upward into ventricles of the brain, through certain doors concerning which science is ignorant, the passageways and chambers of the ancient mysteries. They will realize that the spinal spirit fire is the candidate who is being initiated. In the triangular room of the third ventricle, the Master Mason's degree is given. Here the candidate is buried in the coffin, and here, after 3 days, he rises from the dead. The lower degrees of the ancient mysteries led through tortuous passageways where howling and crying rent the air, and the flames of the inferno flickered through the darkness. The neophyte, seeking for light, was first led through the underworld, where he fought strange beasts and heard the wailing of lost souls. All this was emblematic of man's own lower nature, through which his spiritual ideals must rise to illumination and truth. The higher degrees of the mysteries took place in beautiful domed buildings where white-robed priests chanted and sang, and lights from invisible lamps shone on golden jewels. The greater mysteries represented the felicity of the soul surrounded by light and truth. They symbolized that man had raised himself from the darkness of ignorance into the light of philosophy. Plato said that the body is the sarcophagus of the soul, for he realized that within the form was an immortal principle which could free itself from mortal sheath only by death or by initiation. By the ancients, these two were considered almost synonymous. For that reason, the dying Socrates ordered his disciples to make an offering at the time of his death, similar to the one which candidates made when about to be initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. The mystery of the all-seeing eye was sometimes symbolized by the peacock, because this bird had eyes in all of its feathers. In honor of the sacred eye and the crown of the head, the monks of all nations shave their hair over the place which it is supposed to look out. Small children who have but recently completed their embryonic recapitulation of humanity's early struggle for life have an unduly sensitive area about the crown of the head. The skull does not close there immediately. In some cases, it never closes, although usually the sutures unite between the second and fifth years. The extreme sensitiveness over the area of the third eye is accompanied by a certain clairvoyance. The small child is still living largely in the invisible worlds. While its physical organism is unresponsive, it is conscious and active, at least to a limited degree, in those worlds with which it is connected by the open gateway of the pineal gland. Gradually, certain manifestations of his higher consciousness enter into its physical organism and crystallize into the fine grit found in that gland. There is no grit in the pineal gland until consciousness enters. Gonna pause there. Is that a true thing? I don't know if anybody could say for sure. How would they know this? Did they actually dissect somebody who's living to see if they had this grit in there? Think about that. There's no way to prove this. So this is just more hearsay as far as I'm concerned about the aspect of the grit. It may be something that's there, but whether it's only there for those people who've, entered consciousness or have been enlightened or not, who can say for sure? But that's kind of what he's getting at here. Anyway, back to the reading, and we're almost done, so just bear with me here. Not only are the two glands in the head tremendously important, but the whole glandular system, especially the ductless glandular system, exercises tremendous sway over the human system. The white blood corpuscles are not actually manufactured in either the pancreas or the spleen, but are really formed by activity of the etheric double, which is connected to the physical form through the spleen. A continuous stream of partly etheric white blood corpuscles pours from the invisible world into the visible organism through the gateway of the spleen. The same is true of the liver, for the red blood corpuscles are to a certain degree a crystallization of astral forces, for the liver is the portal leading into the astral body. Gonna pause there again, folks. Remember what I told you before about how they believe in the four different bodies that exist for a person, not just the physical, but also an ethereal and an astral body. And they say the spleen is the gateway to the ethereal and the liver is the gateway for the astral within the body. That's what he's saying right here. And this gets back down into more different occult ideas about who it is that we are and how we exist in the world that we live in. There's a lot of hidden things and invisible worlds around us that these people teach about. Now, are they true or not? Who could say? But I think this is important information, and the ancient peoples understood these things. They knew about these things, and maybe this could give us a more accurate description of how our world really works, because we've been lied to in so many ways about everything through our education and everything else. So I think there could be some merit to some of these ideas that he's presenting here. I would definitely agree that there's spiritual worlds beyond our own here, and there's different dimensions beyond this one, and that we, being human beings, are the actual doorway, the connection between these different worlds or dimensions per se. So, with that being said, I think there might be some merit to some of the things he's talking about, and it's worth investigation. So, if a lot of this stuff winds up to be true or have some aspects of truth to it, it's definitely worth exploring. And these ideas have been hidden from us for the longest time by this secret priestcraft for a reason. And they use these methodologies and these different knowledges for control over the rest of the masses. See, if they know something about how this world works that we don't, they could use that against us. And it's been demonstrated over and over that they do that. So who's to say? Maybe there's something to this. So it does merit some investigation in my view. Anyway, we're almost done. Let's finish reading here because we're down to the end. And let's continue. The 7 major ductless glands are under the control of the 7 planets, and each one of them is actually a 7-fold body, in the same way that all the vital organs are 7-fold. The heart is divided into 7 complete organs by a certain process of occult anatomy, as is also the brain. The fact that the human brain closely resembles, in certain details, especially the organs grouped about the base of it, an androgynous human embryo, is sufficient to cause further investigation. Sometimes physicians will realize that the knowledge of the organs and functions of the human body is the most important and complete method of understanding the religions of all the world. For all religions, even the most primitive, are based on the functions of the human form. It was not without reason that the ancient priests placed over the temple gate the immortal motto, "Man, know thyself." And that is the end of the book there, folks. So, Manly P. Hall dropped a lot of knowledge on us there, didn't he, in this last section of the book. A lot of anatomical features of the human body and how they relate to different occult ideologies and occult bodies, per se. These kind of things do merit more investigation. There's a lot of teachings out there about this stuff within the Rosicrucian writings and the Masonic writings. Some of these are very hard to find, but I assure you this stuff's out there, and it goes into a lot more depth. But you see how it always connects back up with a lot of different ideas of mythology and the sky clock. He talks about the 7 planetary bodies, associating with this idea of the spinal fire and these different centers in the human body. You see, as above, so below. The Hermetic sciences. These things kind of have held sway in the thought of the secret societies for many, many centuries now. So I think a lot of this knowledge, it's heavily guarded for a reason. So there must be some truths contained within it. So, I'm going to continue reading a lot of these different things and trying to break them down and analyze them. And I would encourage everybody else to do so. Don't be afraid to look at this stuff. It's not something to be feared. In fact, many of the control systems that have been put in place in this world would tell you it's either nonsense or it's evil. Don't look at it. Don't read it. Don't believe it. Don't investigate it, because, well, let's face it, the people in control in this world don't want you to have the same advantages that they do. Many of them have the classical training in these different studies, in literature studies, and the myths, the ancient myths, and all of these different ideas. Many of them belong to these secret societies and get this high-level training within these secret schools, and they're bound to secrecy with this stuff. See, that's the thing. It's only through the advent of the internet that many of these books have become available now to the masses. And you do have to dig and search for them. And I believe this is all part of the process of revelation of the method, that they're allowing this stuff to get out in the public now. Because, see, we're at the point of time where all these things will be revealed, and they know it, and they believe they have enough control over society right now that they don't fear people finding this stuff out. So it's out there, it's available right under our noses in public. And with the advent of the internet, this stuff has become available in a way where it wasn't in generations past. It wasn't until the past maybe 15 years that a lot of this stuff started circulating in earnest, without having to go search through old musty Masonic libraries and used bookstores and stuff like that to try to find this stuff. It's readily available on the internet now for anybody who has the tenacity to go look for it and has some kind of a clue what it is they're looking for. All you have to do is search for the stuff, and it's out there. And sometimes you might not find it right away, but it's out there to be found. And I believe that's not by accident either. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I will continue doing this stuff as long as people are interested in listening to some of these different teachings that they have within these secret societies, this information, and I will give my opinions on what the meanings and stuff are with it. So that's kind of what I've been doing here with these different series of readings that I've done. I've found a lot of different old books from the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons and all the different orders and different things like that. And the older the books, the better, in my view. Anything that goes before, say, like the 1930s, before the modern edit, you could find some really good information in there. A lot of the stuff after that time period is really kind of hung up on scientism type ideologies and stuff like that, and really kind of poo-poos the older ideas. So when you look at this stuff, I would say anything before around the 1930s or 1940s is some of your best sources of information. And the quality of the writing, especially if you go back into the 1800s, is so superior to what we see written today. I've authored 3 books now, and I can't write anything that compares with a lot of those books that I read from the 1800s. Those were learned men who wrote these books. They were very educated, and they had a way with words and a certain vernacular about them where they were very informative and also sounded a lot more articulate than I could sound like. So, I do look for that stuff, and I like especially the books from the 1800s for a lot of this occult information, because it's not really given that twist that it's had here, like since the advent of the counterculture of the 1960s, where everything's all about Aleister Crowley and this and that and the other thing. So anything you could find that is older and doesn't have that spin on it, that pop culture type spin that has these ideas mixed in with it, it's a little bit better in my view. So stuff from the 1800s is good, and stuff pre-theosophy as well. A lot of the early books on theosophy and the stuff that falls before theosophy actually came about as a movement and became a popular thing. A lot of those books actually have a lot of really good information packed in them as well. But anyway, thanks for hanging out with me again tonight, guys, and we'll see you next time. I'm not sure what it is I'm going to break apart next, but whatever it is, I assure you it'll be interesting, much like this book has been. Thanks again. Have a good night.